I think you said that you fear that men checking out could be a fatal situation for Western culture.
Oh, it's definitely fatal for Western culture. One of the things that struck me over the last year, well, even last night at the lecture, at last night's lecture, 85% of the people were men. Now, in the 12-part series that preceded that, more and more women came. And then there was this gap, but like the vast majority of the audience was men, and men of all sorts. Like it wasn't your, like every sort of man was represented there. Young, old, rough, civilized, the whole range, you know, and they're coming from quite a long distance, many of them. You know, they come up and say, well, I drove from New York City, or I drove from Michigan. And it's like, well, you could watch it on YouTube. It's like, no, they're not doing that. And that's very promising to me because, well, this Logos, the West will die without the rebirth of the Logos, because the West is that. So with that gone, it's gone. And we've seen what's arisen to replace it. Well, there's fascism, there's communism, and then there's the New Age mess, because it's a mess. And most of it's wish fulfillment and fantasy and inability to, there's creativity in it, but there's no capacity to edit whatsoever. There's no coherence. And so that stuff's so weak that anyone with any commitment can just push it aside. And there's no justification for the Marxism or for the fascism. It's like, we already had that experiment.
Could you describe what you mean by the rebirth of the Logos then, in that context?
Well, it's part of it is taking voluntary responsibility for the appalling conditions of your life, essentially, that you're a suffering creature that's mortal, right? And that you're the locus of evil, both of those things. And that it's your response, that your life is about responsibility, and it's your responsibility to voluntarily accept that, and then to do what you can about it. Even though it's, in some sense, you know, it's an enterprise doomed to failure in some sense, because you're going to die, and the world is a carnage, a place of carnage. But that you can accept that. And if you can't accept it, then what that means is that you're not integrated enough. Because if you're integrated enough, then you can accept it. It's like the test of the integration. So your character isn't forged sufficiently if you cannot tolerate that. And it's not like it's an easy thing to tolerate. Often what people do is they just don't think about it. They just push it out of their mind. And no wonder. But they pay for that with shallowness and with self-contempt and with the inability to bear suffering nobly, let's say. And there's nothing in that that's good for people. So the rebirth of the Logos, as far as I'm concerned, is, well, it's this willingness to take responsibility for the shaping of destiny. That's it.